Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. I hope you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 26th of January. We're getting ready for Parshas Mishpatim. I wanted to share some sources on the Parsha this week, and some of them might be kind of startling, a little bit surprising. But let me tell you why I'm going down this route. I saw a news item the other day out of here in Tennessee that just was a little bit shocking. Here's the title: U.S. megachurch. This was reported I saw it reported locally, but here, this one I found online was written a little bit more, how should I say, a little bit more family friendly was this article. I saw it reported locally, but this one here was worded a little bit nicer. U.S. megachurch in shambles amid pastors' misdemeanors. So this was the 22nd of January, just a couple of days ago. Pastor Taverner Smith's Venue Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, United States, began in 2012 in an old building that once belonged to a club. It grew in leaps and bounds, such that every Sunday, up to 2,000 worshipers congregated in the church by 2020. By 2015, Venue was on Outreach Magazine's list of fastest growing churches in the USA. Thereafter, the church began to unravel, triggered by the misdemeanors of its founder, Taverner Smith, his extramarital affair with a married female church member, his divorce with his wife, aggressive drives for membership, tithes, and donations have combined to destroy the fast-growing church. Members have quit in droves, but not before the pastor had grown rich on the tithes collected, buying up properties and treating himself with designer wares and new cars. Here's a quote. In January 2021, that's a year ago, Smith announced to the congregation what many staff and volunteers already suspected. He and his wife were splitting for good. He said that the board had asked him to take a break from and attend 6 weeks of counseling. But 2 weeks later, according to multiple former attendees, he was back at the pulpit claiming God had told him to return. So this is a church not far away in Chattanooga, other side of the state of Tennessee. So here's this mega church, and you could just see this. Imagine 2,000 worshipers showing up on an average Sunday. The amount of money that's flowing through this pastor's hands. He obviously had a lot of charisma and charm. I assume he had some people skills, but he obviously crossed numerous boundaries. Aside from enriching himself from the tithes that were coming in, he also ended up in an affair with a married female church member, ruined his marriage, his family, everything fell apart. I see a story like this and I say, wow, what a train wreck, a disaster, terrible. Unfortunately, many of us look at a story like that and we say, okay, it makes sense. That kind of thing could go on in a mega church, but something like that can't happen in our quarters. We're better than that. We just have so many safety rails in place. Something like that could never happen. And what I want to talk about today in our class is don't believe that for a second. None of us are immune. None of us are safe to assume that we would never cross boundaries and that we wouldn't end up throwing away our lives, careers, marriages, ruining our families because we get stricken with desire. And this doesn't have to be desire for an extramarital affair. This could be any type of unhealthy desire, any type of unhealthy temptation that we find ourselves drawn towards. We're human, and as humans, we are prone to make bad decisions. We need to put safeguards in place. Now, if anyone thinks this is limited to a mega church and this is not something that could ever affect us, I've got a startling commentary on this week's Parsha to share with you. So let's scroll down. We're looking in this week's Parshas Mishpatim, and here's towards the beginning of the Parsha. It's in Perek Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Yud Daled. The Pasuk is talking about murder, and it says, V'chi yazid ish al re'eu lehargo. If a man plots deliberately against his friend to slay him, me'im mizbechi tikachenu lamus. So if this person had put a plot together with cunning, even from my altar, meaning even if this person tries to seek refuge in the Beis Hamikdash, clinging onto the Mizbeach, tear him off that Mizbeach to Kachenu Lamus. If the fellow is guilty and he needs to stand trial, he needs to stand before Beis Din, and he's been found to be guilty of murder. There was witnesses, there was warning, there was all the elements that are necessary for this fellow to deserve capital punishment. We carry out that punishment. Even if this fellow tried to seek refuge, holding on to the Mizbeach, we take him off the Mizbeach. We tear him off the Mizbeach and we take him out to be killed. This might be where the idea comes from. In a lot of cultures, there was this idea of sanctuary, that someone could find sanctuary if they ran into a church, if they ran into a house of worship, that somehow or another the police just were not authorized to go and yank him out of there. This might be where this idea came from, but the Torah is clearly telling us it's not true. The Torah says if someone is found guilty, you have a murderer, it doesn't matter where he's claimed to have found sanctuary. He could have run into the Beis HaMikdash. He could be hanging onto the Mizbeach. Nonetheless, we take him out of there. If the fellow is guilty, we take him out of there and he is brought to justice. Rashi points out here, he's quoting the Medrash, the Mechilta, as well as the Gemara, and he's commenting on what does this mean, me'im mizbechi? Even if he's holding on to the Mizbeach, you'd get him out of there. In the Beis HaMikdash, who is allowed near the Mizbeach? Kohanim. So what does it mean? So look what the Rashi says. Im haya Kohen, the pasuk is telling us who, if this person was a Kohen and v'rotza lavod avoda, and he says, listen, it's my day, I'm on duty, I want to go into the Beis HaMikdash and do my avoda, I want to be part of the temple service, tikachenu lamus. We don't care. We don't care that he's claiming I'm needed. I'm a vital part of this. I'm playing an important role in the Beis HaMikdash today. Don't bother me with this justice business. It doesn't matter. We'll take him out of there and we will bring him to justice. If he deserves execution, that's what will happen. That's how the Gemara and the Medrash explain this. So it almost seems to be saying, even if the guy is a Kohen, even if he's a Kohen, being in the Beis HaMikdash does not afford him any sanctuary. That's how Rashi is telling us to learn this. But I want to share with you a startling source. I saw this a couple of years ago and it just boggled my mind. And when I saw the story this week about the mega church and the pastor in Chattanooga, Tennessee, it brought this back to me. It reminded me of this. And I want to share this with you. The Meshech Chachma is written pretty much the turn of the 20th century by Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk, also known as the Or Sameach, for the work that he wrote on the Rambam. But his work on the Chumash is called the Meshech Chachma. I have a copy of this at home. It's such a nice idea. If you ever give someone a sefer as a present, a bar mitzvah present, it's so nice to just write a little inscription in it, because years from now, when you take that off the shelf and look at it, it'll bring back memories about where you were and who was in your life that gave this to you. I have a Meshech Chachma. It's not the newest printing, but I keep it because of sentimental value. I received it as a bar mitzvah present from an elderly man in Cleveland, and his name was Mr. Kaplowitz. He had a son, Rabbi Kaplowitz, who would teach a shir. He taught in the school in the Hebrew Academy, and he also would teach a shir, a Gemara shir in the afternoon at my shul. He would walk up from Cleveland Heights. He would teach. I remember my father would dutifully go every Shabbos afternoon to his Gemara shir before Mincha. Rabbi Kaplowitz would stay for Shalosh Shudas at shul. He would speak at Shalosh Shudas, usually share at Divrei Torah. But his father, there was an elderly Mr. Kaplowitz who would daven at our shul. And he gave me this sefer as a bar mitzvah present. He wrote a very nice inscription in it. So, but that's not what I have. I took this from online where it's very nice, clear print. But nonetheless, I still hang on to that one. Just nice sentimental value. Be that as it may, serious tangent there. But be that as it may, please, that's what I'm saying. I'm making a call. If you give someone a bar mitzvah sefer, write a little inscription. Doesn't have to be something so incredibly fancy, but this way, years from now, when you look back at it, or the child looks back at it when they're grown up, it'll be meaningful to them. So here's what the Meshech Chachma has to say on this pasuk. This is going to boggle your mind. This again, the pasuk says, it's in bold. If someone conspires against another member of Klal Yisrael to kill that person in some kind of sneaky plot, even if this person, if the murderer tries to find sanctuary in the Beis HaMikdash, clinging to the Mizbeach, take him off the Mizbeach and bring him to court to stand justice, stand trial for what he's done. And if he deserves execution, he's to be executed. It doesn't make a difference that he's clinging to the Mizbeach. Look what the Meshech Chachma says here. Lo muzar, it is not strange, lomar, to say, the kavanas hamikra, that what is the pasuk getting at? L'mashanog etzel ha'amim, the kasuv b'torah, pen yahargenu anshe makom b'farav avimelech. So he says it's not strange to see this. In other words, what is the pasuk saying? The pasuk is getting at something which was very common amongst at the world at the time, is that the locals might kill him. You see this idea by Paro, you see it by Avimelech. The lashon arma, what does it mean? Arma matzano etzel nachash. It's talking about, that's something that you'll find that we say that the nachash was it was a room that it was very cunning. And the nachash, the snake in the Gan Eden, had his eyes on Chava, that he wanted Chava. However, that's to be understood. The snake was thinking, I'll kill Adam. I'll marry Chava. He's saying this is the connotations, what's going on here. The pasuk is getting at here, why would someone have killed their friend using arma, using cunning? This is this idea, what was very common in the ancient world, that if a person wanted to steal a married woman, what might he do? He can't live with the justification that he's having an affair with a woman while she's in a marital relationship with her husband. So what's the way to justify what happens? Knock off the husband, murder the husband. That's what we saw by Paro. That what happened? Avram was scared when he went down to Mitzrayim with Sarah. He was scared to let Paro know that he was the husband of Sarah, because then Paro would kill Avram to have Sarah. When he went into the land of Avimelech, the Plishtim, he also said the story that Sarah is his sister, not his wife, because he was worried he'd be killed. And whenever you see this expression of arma, so arma seems to, with cunning, with sneakiness, that is reminiscent of what the Gemara tells us about the snake in Gan Eden. He wanted to knock off Adam, so he could have Chava. So here's this idea. The way the Meshech Chachma is darshaning the pasuk is as follows. Why did this fellow kill his friend? Killed his friend in order to have his wife. In other words, they couldn't, maybe the couple even conspired together. The wife said, okay, I'm willing to submit to you, but I'm a married woman. The only way that this could, so to say, be legit is you got to knock off the husband. So this pasuk is getting at the idea, why did this fellow kill his friend? And he used this expression, arma, is because he wanted to steal his wife. This is what the pasuk means. When a person is going to go up and be a thorn in the side of their friend, and he desires the wife of his friend, that's what the pasuk's referring to. Someone who desired this married woman, so what will he do? He'll kill the husband so he can have the wife. That's the next part of the pasuk. Such a person, you should tear him away from the mizbeach, because he will be brought to justice and be put to death. Now look what he said. This is going to blow your mind. Until now, you could say, okay, it's making sense. This is fellow who is coveting his friend's wife. He's killed the friend, and the pasuk is telling us, tear him away. He sought refuge in the Beis Hamikdash. Tear him away from the mizbeach. But look what the Meshech Chachma does now. This is mind-boggling. How do you understand the next part of the pasuk that says, take him off the mizbeach because he's going to be executed? Yoser. Such an idea that someone would knock off their friend in order to have the wife. This was more common amongst Kohanim. This was more common amongst Kohanim people in the Beis Hamikdash who would have been operating by the Mizbeach. Such a practice, not just to have an affair, but to first knock off the husband in order to make her a widow and then take her. This was, let me read those words again. Such an occurrence would happen more often than not with Kohanim versus the rest of Klal Yisrael. Why? Mishum shegrusha asura aleim. A Kohen can't marry a divorcee. So a Kohen who wants to have an affair with this woman, and the woman's saying, no, I don't feel right, I'm a married woman. And he's saying, I don't feel right, she's a married woman. They can't conspire and say, okay, let's get the husband to grant you a divorce. They can't, because that won't do the Kohen any good. If he wants to be with her in the sanctity of matrimony, a Kohen is not allowed to marry a grusha. He's not allowed to marry a divorcee. But who can a Kohen marry? An almana. A Kohen can marry a widow. So what might they do if we want to be together in the context of a marriage? The only way to make this happen is to kill the husband. That's what he's saying. So this would have been more common for such a sneaky arrangement to take place. This would have been more common with a Kohen than Yisrael. This is mind-boggling. Since a Kohen cannot marry a divorcee, the only way he could have this married woman in a context of a marriage would be to kill the husband. Sometimes, if they're really desperate, there is no other way for them to get together. The only way to make this happen is to kill the husband. So the pasuk is saying a wild idea. The pasuk is saying, if a man plots against a friend to kill him so he could have his wife, take him off the mizbeach. What does that mean? This was more often than not likely to happen with a Kohen who had hatched such a plot, because that was the only way he could have this married woman if she was a widow. So that's now look at this last line. Kohanim, and when it comes to Kohanim, why were they, so to say, in the danger zone? Why is this pasuk specifically speaking to them? That they may be finding themselves in temptation more than a Yisrael. Not just because of the fact that, because they can't marry a divorcee and a Yisrael could. But how did a Kohen get himself in this position? Look what he says now. A Kohanim, when it comes to Kohanim, Hanashim tzrichos lahem. Women need the Kohanim. They seek them out and they have a relationship of some sort with them. Liske korbanos ziva violedes. Because they have to deal with the Kohen when they need to bring the korbanos for being a zava. A zava is a woman who's had an abnormal discharge. So when the Beis Hamikdash stood, the way they could become purified once again was by bringing a korban. So they're going to the Beis Hamikdash and having to deal with Kohanim. Yoledes, a woman who's given birth, she's got to bring some at the end of her purification process. She's got to bring korbanos, so she's got to go deal with these Kohanim. So because they're dealing with one another, they might strike up a relationship. That's why the pasuk is specifically using, the Torah is using this context of tear him off the mizbeach, because we're talking more often than that. This is talking to the Kohen. This is absolutely wild. What the pasuk is telling us, according to the Meshech Chachma, is absolutely wild. The pasuk is telling us that a Kohen, this could happen. It's not just a pastor in Chattanooga who's going to end up throwing away his life, his marriage, and ruining, being a homewrecker. It's not just that pastor of a megachurch in Chattanooga. This was very, very possible for every Kohen in the Beis Hamikdash. Because of their job responsibilities, put them in positions where they had to be dealing with women very often who were coming to the Beis Hamikdash. They may all of a sudden strike up a relationship. They may all of a sudden find someone who catches their eye and they develop some fancy with. And now the only way that they can have them is they have to break the marriage. They can't have them just get divorced, because a Kohen can't marry a Grusha. So the only way that the Kohen could have his desire fulfilled is to knock off the husband. And that's who the pasuk is speaking to say to him, if you do this, we'll take him right off the mizbeach and we'll yank him out and we'll execute him. We'll bring him to justice. So we make a mistake of thinking, when we see a story like this, we make a mistake of thinking, wow, that could only happen to the pastor of the megachurch. Something like this can't happen to me, can't happen to anyone who's engaged in Torah and mitzvahs and masim tovim, because here's the Meshech Chachma saying that's exactly who this pasuk is speaking to Kohanim, because somewhere along the lines, they're going to have to develop some type of working relationship. One thing could lead to another. Before they know it, they're caught up with temptation and desire, and they find themselves in a position of murder. Now, we're not all Kohanim, we're not all rabbis, but nonetheless, we all find ourselves in position where sooner or later we have a relationship. It could be a work relationship. It could be a friendly relationship with a friend, a neighbor, whatever it was. We strike up a relationship with somebody who's not our spouse. And things could very easily spiral out of control if we're not careful. And it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to put some safety measures in place to make certain that things don't get out of control, because it can happen. And if it can happen to a Kohen in the Beis Hamikdash, it can happen to any one of us. So let's not fool ourselves to say a story like this only happens to pastors of mega churches who's taking their tithes and buying Lamborghinis and helicopters and whatnot. No, no, no. It can happen to each and every one of us in one way or another. We've got to be absolutely, absolutely careful. Let me share with you, it gets even wilder. Here's this next, once I saw this Meshech Chachma, it reminded me of something I saw years ago. And I'm going to tell you the context of that soon. This is in Parshas Emor, where it's telling us about some of the differences between a Kohen and a Kohen Gadol in terms of who they can marry and who they could become tamei, who they could contaminate themselves for in terms of death, going to funerals and whatnot. So let's see. HaKohen HaGadol Me'achav. This is in Vayikra. It's in Sefer Vayikra. It's in Parshas Emor. So the pasuk is talking about the Kohen Gadol. HaKohen HaGadol Me'achav. So it's pasuk Yud in Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21, verse 10. HaKohen HaGadol Me'achav. If you have the Kohen Gadol, Asher Yitzaka Al Rosho Shemen, and Mishcha has been anointed with the special anointing oil, Umileas Yado Lilbosh Esa Begadim, and he's been inaugurated. He's wearing the special garments of a Kohen Gadol. Es Rosho Lo Yifra Begadav Lo Yifram. So it's saying if he loses a very close loved one, he's not supposed to. He has to look very, very dignified in his capacity as Kohen Gadol. So he doesn't take upon himself some of the minhagei avelus about letting his hair grow long and whatnot, and not getting a haircut. Because of his capacity as a Kohen Gadol, he has to conduct himself a little differently. A few psukim later, it reminds us about his marriage limitations. Yud Gimel, v'hu isha b'vsuleha yikach. A Kohen Gadol, unlike a regular Kohen who's allowed him, who can't marry a grusha, a divorcee, but can marry a widow, a Kohen Gadol can't marry either a divorcee or a widow. He can only marry a besula. He could only marry a virgin, a woman who has not been with anyone else yet. Yodalid, Almana Ugrusha, he cannot marry a widow. He cannot marry a divorcee. V'chalala Zona, or he can't marry a woman who's been desecrated. That means she could have been with someone outside of marriage. Eselo lo yikach, he cannot marry her. Ki im besula me'amav yikach isha. He can only marry a besula. He can only marry a virgin. That is what we know about a Kohen Gadol. One of the commentaries in the Chumash, this is called the Moshav Zekanim. This is another work written by the Balei Tosos. He has a fascinating, if not frightening, theory, a speculative theory as to why is it that the Kohen Gadol, in contradistinction to the Kohen, a regular Kohen cannot marry a divorcee, but he is allowed to marry an almana, a widow. A Kohen Gadol can't even marry a widow. Why? Look at this theory he's got. He imbesula me'amav. So he says, Hiksha HaChasid, the pious one. It's not entirely clear when the Balei Tosos quote the pious one, who that is. Some say it's Rabbi Yehuda HaChasid. He was living around that time of the Balei Tosos. So he was the famous Rabbi Yehuda HaChasid, known as Rabbi Yehuda the Pious, lived in Germany at that time. So Hiksha HaChasid, V'lama nitztava Kohen Gadol b'vsula dafka v'lo ba'almana. Why is it that a Kohen Gadol has to marry a virgin? He cannot marry an almana. He cannot marry a widow. A regular Kohen can marry a widow. Why can't the Kohen Gadol marry a widow? This is mind-boggling what he speculates here. The T-rates, here was his answer. Levisha Yamazkeres Hashem, on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol would go lifnai lifnim. He would go into the most holy chambers in the Beis HaMikdash where the Aron was, and he would utter God's special name. The Shema Nosan Einav Be'eshes Ish. Maybe he had his eyes on a married woman, B'shas Azkara, and at the time where he's mentioning God's, the Shema Meforash, that most holy name of God, maybe at that moment, he would have in mind, he would daven, Sheyimos Ba'alav Yisana, that husband of that wife should die. So now the wife is a widow, and he can marry her. He can't bring himself to actually murder that husband, but when he's saying God's most powerful name, which could accomplish things out of the norm and out of the, beyond the laws of nature, he would use that almost like as a form of sorcery, you might say, to cause the husband to die. So now the wife is an almana and he can marry her. L'kach amar Torah, therefore the Torah says, sheyisa besula v'lo almana. So the Torah says we're going to make sure that never happens. How are we going to make sure that never happens? To put the rule on the Kohen Gadol that he could only marry a basula, he can only marry a virgin, he cannot marry an almana, he cannot marry a widow. That is mind-boggling. What the Moshav Zekanim, this is the Balei Tosos, what they're saying is, this is Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, the most sanctified day of the year. Or you'd think someone has their Yetzer Hara on the sidelines. Someone's only Kadosh V'tar. He's only pure. This is the Kohen Gadol. Where is he? He's in the Beis HaMikdash. Where in the Beis HaMikdash? He's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, where the Aron is. He knows if he steps out of line in there, he could die. And what are we nervous about? That while he's in there, he's going to be so smitten with this married woman that he desires, that he's going to, when he's saying God's most special name, at that moment, he'll have in mind that guy should die, and therefore he'll be able to marry that married woman because she'll be a widow. So to make certain that he never goes down that path, the Torah says we're taking away that option. A Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow. Therefore, even though he was armed, so to say, with this tool of being able to pronounce God's holiest name in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which could have potentially caused this husband to die, he'll never do that because he knows that's not going to help him. He can't marry a widow anyhow. The very fact that he would entertain such a possibility, the Baalei Tosfos offer this answer, to entertain such a possibility means that he doesn't consider it out of bounds for a Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKadoshim near the Aron, while he's uttering God's name in full knowledge if he steps out of line, he's going to die, to have in mind that his friend should die so he could have this married woman as his own. What does that tell you about the nature of the beast? The nature of the beast is there, temptation is there, and temptation is strong. And each and every one of us are making a mistake if we think, no, not me. I've beat that one. I'm beyond that. I can't mess up. I've got my act together. We're making a huge mistake. And this isn't just in the world of affairs and extramarital affairs. This is in the world of any form of temptation. Each and every one of us know ourselves. No one knows ourselves the way we do. We all have something that we're tempted, some road that we're tempted to go down, which we know we're not proud of, and we know is wrong, which we know doesn't fit with the Torah and the mitzvahs. Whatever it is, we each have our own challenges, and we should never fool ourselves to thinking, I'm beyond that. I conquered that one. That's not lurking in the background anymore. We're fooling ourselves. We can all make terrible decisions. We can all make tragic errors. So we've got to put safety guards in place in our lives. I want to share with you, here was an incredible article that was written several years ago. Again, the context of this was terrible context. This was written in the summer of 2015. It was in the OU's Jewish Action magazine. It was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz, who was a rabbi for many, many years in Silver Spring, Maryland. He also taught law at University of Maryland. Since he left that job, I believe in about 2010 or so. I'm sorry, 2000. I'll be wrong. It was around probably around 2010, 2011, 12. And he lives in Yerushalayim, where he's a Rav of a shul, as well as teaching at Yeshiva Or Sameach. Fascinating person, incredible writer, and a real Talmud Chacham. So he wrote this article called "When Leaders Fail: Healing from Rabbinic Scandal." Tragically, this didn't happen in a vacuum. This happened. This article was written after some terrible scandals, and the one that was most notable was the one that had happened, I believe, in the previous year. That was when there was a terrible episode in Washington, D.C., where a rabbi was caught. He had been filming women at the mikvah. He ended up in jail. He was there just until recently. He was released, I think, when the coronavirus was really kicking off in the prisons. They did an assessment about how much time he had left versus the risk of being in prison and his behavior and whatnot, and he was released. Again, he's totally disappeared. He's not playing a role in any Jewish community whatsoever. I have no idea how he's making a living at this point. If he's just working as a cashier in some grocery store, I have no idea what he's doing. His marriage tragically came to an end after that as well. Anyhow, I want to share with you a couple paragraphs from this article. In Bernard Malamud, or some pronounce it Malamud's novel, The Natural, an extremely talented ball player, Roy Hobbs, is discovered to have taken a bribe to throw a baseball game. He is barred from baseball for life, and all his records are expunged. In a poignant final scene, a young boy turns to Roy with pleading eyes and says, "Say it ain't so," but Roy cannot. He simply weeps. In many ways, this novel is a metaphor for the loss of innocence, for the sadness of discovering that those we thought were paragons of virtue and greatness are flawed, for the sense of betrayal as we are cast adrift by those in whom we put our trust and faith. In many ways, this metaphor aptly describes a crisis that is spreading within the Torah community. We live in the era of the fallen hero, indeed the tragic hero, who is destroyed by the fatal flaw that lies within. In all walks of life, people whom we admired have disappointed us with their failures and weaknesses. We have become disillusioned and cynical. Unfortunately, even within the Torah camp, leaders in whom we placed our trust have betrayed us. And while the overwhelming majority of rabbis, teachers, and spiritual mentors perform their tasks with integrity and commitment, we should never make the mistake of condemning the many because of the sins of the few. Many of us have lost faith in the very people who are supposed to inspire us in our faith. We see them engulfed in sexual scandals, child abuse, political intrigue, bribery, and fraud. Some are accused of direct wrongdoing, others of cover-up and dissembling. Many have lost faith not only in those who are supposed to transmit Torah, but to some degree in the goodness and morality of the Torah itself. God's name and his glory quite literally have been besmirched, and the very definition of Chilul Hashem. A little bit later, need for boundaries. Most of the recent scandals, not all, involve abusive or exploitive treatment of women. Many, not all, of these problematic encounters started quite innocently in the context of counseling, spiritual advice, and the like. What is needed is a code of ethics, offensive sorts, that would prevent benign encounters from escalating. No better code of ethics exists than the Shulchan Aruch itself. Counterintuitively, a rabbi may fail to apply the Shulchan Aruch to himself. After all, who is going to correct him? Even with the most noble of intentions, there's enormous mistakes. This is an enormous mistake with devastating consequences. There are very good reasons why halacha prohibits the seclusion of a man with a woman. And in response to the plethora of litigation based on sexual harassment, these reasons have been appreciated even by secular culture. Just go to footnote number 4. You'll see it right here on the next page. As employers seek to minimize liability for sexual harassment claims, companies are adopting increasingly strict workplace codes concerning dress, workplace romance, seclusion, and with the opposite gender, over familiarity, suggestive flirtatious speech, etc. As strange as it may sound, modern employee handbooks are beginning to resemble the outdated rules of the Shulchan Aruch. I thought that's a fascinating observation. Back up top. The laws of yichud, seclusion, and negia, affectionate physical contact, reflect the reality that sexual attraction is a very potent, powerful, and somewhat uncontrollable force. And we have the responsibility to ensure that certain lines are not crossed. Just going to footnote number 5. The story of David and Bathsheba is, of course, the classic example. It tells you where to find that. Much of the book of Mishlei warns the wise son to avoid sexual temptation. See, for example, he tells you where in Mishlei, while these verses do have allegorical or symbolic meaning, straightforward interpretation is not displaced, and these warnings are to be taken literally as well. Similarly, the Gemara in Ksuvos teaches, there is no guardian in matters of sexuality, meaning no one can be trusted. We must all take precautions. Back up top, the Shulchan Aruch generally prohibits flirtatious or intimate talk between men and women, even if the technical strictures of yichud and negia are not violated. Emotionally intimate talk can easily lead to improper physical contact, or at the very least, emotional manipulation. Finally, a rabbi might justifiably feel that his intentions are l'shem shamayim, that his sole desire is to help a person in need, that is beyond the baser instincts that may drive regular people astray. This was precisely the mistake of Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all men. He too thought he was above temptation. He too thought that the Torah's rules against accumulating wealth and excessive wives should not apply to him because he was in no danger of losing his bearings and straying. And he discovered that we are all vulnerable and weak, that we can all fail, and that this is the very reason we all need to adhere to the bright lines of the halachic system. I thought that's very well spoken, very well stated. And what Rabbi Breitowitz is pointing out is that each and every one of us are humans. As humans, we have the shortcomings of human beings, and that means that we are vulnerable to temptation. We all are tempted in any number of different ways. This doesn't have to be sexual, any number of ways. And wherever that area is, we have to be on guard, and we're fooling ourselves if we think that, no, that can't happen to me. I want to share something with you, conclude with this. I want to share something with you. This is in Parshas Vayeshev. Last year in the high school here, I taught Chumash, and one of the parshios that I taught was Vayeshev. And Vayeshev deals with the sale of Yosef by his brothers. He goes to Egypt, and he finds himself in the house of Potiphar as a slave in Potiphar's house. And we know that Ashes Potiphar, the wife, Mrs. Potiphar, tries to have her way with Yosef, and he resists temptation. He's put under extremely challenging set of circumstances, and he finds the strength to withhold and not to become ensnared by all the advances that Ashes Potiphar, Mrs. Potiphar, is trying to put on him to get him to be intimate with her. I want to share with you something, how I tried to teach the students in the class, and I think it applies to this. So this is in Parshas Vayeshev on page 4. So look at, this is in Perek Lamed Tes, chapter 39. So Zion, it was after these matters that Yosef was sold as a slave. Yosef, and his master's wife lifts up her eyes to Yosef, and she says, Shechva imi, lie with me. 8. He refused. He says to his master's wife, my master knows nothing about what's going on in the house. He trusts me with everything. This would be such a betrayal. Tess. There's nobody in this house we trust who's in a greater position than me. He has not withheld anything from me except for you, because you're his wife. And second of all, how can I do something which is wrong? I'll sin to God. So he's first telling the wife of Potiphar on pure practical moral grounds, because he doesn't think that she'll listen to the God angle. She's not someone who's a God-fearing woman. So he tells her, listen, something you might understand is I can't betray your husband. Your husband has put such great faith in me. That would be such a stab in the back. I can't do it. And second of all, I'm a God-fearing person, and I can't do something which God would object to. 10, Yud. Yosef yom yom. This went on day after day after day. She keeps trying to chisel away at his defenses, and Yosef would not listen to her. Lishkavetzla, to lay down beside her, liyosima, or to be with her. So I want to share with you some insights from Rashi and also the Ibn Ezra, what he says here. The first Rashi we're going to see is going on, they're all going on Yud, on Pasuk Yud. So Pasuk Yud said in 10, that what happened? She's making all her advances towards Yosef, and he keeps turning her down. And it says a couple of things. It says, "V'lo shamai leha," he would not listen to her. Lishkav etzla, to lay down. Etzla means beside her. It doesn't say to lay down with her, on her. It says lay down beside her. What does that mean? So Rashi says, he's quoting the Medrash, Lishkav etzla afilu below tashmish. When she saw that Yosef wasn't giving into her request, to let's have an affair, she says, okay, I got a different request. If we're not going to have an affair, we're not going to go all the way, we're not going to do that, at least lishkav etzla, at least lie down next to me, at least let's cuddle, at least let's do that. No one has to say we have to actually have an affair and be fully intimate. Let's at least to hold each other. Let's at least go. And Yosef says, no, he's not even going to do that. He says, no, I'm not going there. I'm not starting the train. Once you start the train, it's going to be impossible to stop it. So Yosef's saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Look what the Ibn Ezra does. He even says it was more. Ibn Ezra says, what does it mean, l'shkav etzla? So he says, Yosef wouldn't lay down beside her. What does that mean? Not even cuddling up in the same bed and holding each other, but he says, l'shkav etzla afilu l'shachev. He wouldn't even lay down anywhere near her. She's in the room. Okay, we're not even going to be in the same bed. I'm not laying down in the same room. This woman is trouble. I'm not starting this, because once you start that train, you get that train moving, who knows I'm going to be able to stop it. So he keeps pulling the safety zone. He's doing whatever he can to set up warning signs, to put up safety markers, safety fences. He keeps moving them closer and closer to make it that he'll never get to the point of actually sitting with her. And then Ibn Ezra even goes one step further. Liyosima, because what did the pasuk say? He wouldn't listen to her lishkav etzla, to lay down near her, and lihiyosima, and to be with her. What does it mean to be with her? Liyosima, l'daber sichos, to have lengthy conversations. He says, this woman is trouble. I don't even want to get into, I'll answer yes, no, one word answers, whatever it is, but I don't want to end up with lengthy conversations with her. because once I start that, she's going to start the flirting. She'll start the salacious, whatever it's going to be. I don't want to even start anything because I don't know where it's going to go. And once we start that train of temptation, it's just going to be too hard to stop. So this is from a worksheet I prepared for the kids that was on that section. So I had there, according to Rashi and Ibn Ezra, what important lesson was Yosef teaching us? So I was saying that the most important lesson that Yosef is teaching us is if we want to fight desire, if we want to fight temptation, pull it back. Don't even get started. Don't even engage. Don't even start the process. We're making a mistake. We're saying, okay, I'll only go this far. It's going to be so hard to stop. Don't even start. I gave the kids an example. I said, imagine I'm on a massive diet and I have such a weakness for pizza. And but my doctor says, Males, you got to stop eating the pizza. So I say, you know what? I'm not going to eat the pizza, but you know what I'm going to do? I want to have something. So I'm at least going to sit down and just sit in a fresh pizza shop just to smell the aromas. Is that smart? And all the kids said, no, that's a stupid move, because once you're in there, you start smelling that pizza, a fresh pizza, and you love it so much. And doctors say it's not healthy for you. It's inevitable. You're just going to be torturing yourself. And sooner or later, you're going to give in. And even if you don't give in, you'll have tortured yourself and made yourself miserable. They all said that. I said, oh, great, guys. Now let's apply that to other areas. Think of something, whatever it is, whatever area it is that we're feeling pulled, whatever temptation it is. And we're all got different ones. We got similar ones. We've all got different ones too. Whatever it is, apply that same idea. Don't start the ball rolling. It's so much harder to stop it than it is never to start the process in the first place. Then I asked him, I said, how could this apply to recovering alcoholics? And we all talked about it. I said, yeah, let's say you've got a friend, you've got an uncle, whoever it may be, who's a recovering alcoholic. Are you going to invite him? Hey, you want to watch the Super Bowl? Rather than just watch it in my home, let's go watch it in a pub. Let's go watch it in a bar together. Is that smart? Now said, no, that's a stupid idea, because once he's around people drinking, he smells alcohol, and it's all there. It's just going to drive him. It's going to drive him back to alcohol. And even if he doesn't give in, it's going to be torture. Yeah, they all saw that. I said, what about a recovering drug addict? So they said, yeah, the same thing. If you knew someone who had recovered from drugs, the last thing he wants to do is then be in a place where he's going to be tempted and to start seeing it, start smelling it. I told him about a friend that I had that's been trying to kick the habit of smoking for 20 years now. And this guy told me that he's had so many times in the course of those 20 years where he was this close. He had given it up for a week or two, and he was just out walking, and he smelled secondhand smoke. He smelled someone at a street corner exhale smoke. I smelled it. I'm like, yuck. But he smells it and it's like, oh my God, he just got all of his blood pumping again. I need that. And it drove him back to buy his cigarettes. I said, what about the guy in the diet? That was the example of a guy going into the pizza shop or going into the bakery. I just want to smell the fresh baked goods. Bad mistake. Don't do it. And this is what it's teaching us. What it's teaching us is that we've got to the best way to not fall victim to our temptations is to avoid them. Stay away. I also told them we daven every single day at the end of brachos. At the end of brachos hashachar, we say Yehi Ratzon. We say Yehi Ratzon Mafanecha Hashem Elokeinu V'Okei Avosenu Shetargilenu B'Torasecha. That you should accustom us to study your Torah. We should cling to your mitzvahs. And don't bring us to make chataim, sins. And then we say lo lidei nisayon. And don't bring us into feeling any types of challenges. So that's what we say. We say, don't bring us to feeling nisyonos. Don't feel us to say to feel those challenges, to being pulled in those directions. We're asking Hashem not to put us into a makom nisayon, into a place of challenge, of temptation. So doesn't it make sense if that's what we're asking God not to put us in? We should say, okay, well, I'm not going to put myself in a challenging position. We all know what our challenges are. When I know what they are, stay clear of them. That's the best. It's so much easier to stay clear than to be in them and then have to fight those urges. It's going to be so much tougher. And the last one here is in Pirkei Avos. Ben Zoma Omer Eza Gibor. What's the definition of a Gibor? Someone who's really mighty, someone who's really, really powerful. Is it someone who could go to the gym and bench press? Is it someone who could just swim tons of laps? No. What's a Gibor? Hakovesh es Yitzro. A Gibor is someone who's able to overpower who can vanquish their desires. That's the definition of a gibor. And he brings a proof from a pasuk in Mishlei in Proverbs. That's it. Ezu gibor akovesh es Yisro. I remember in school, and as growing up in elementary school, they had a big poster, and many of the classrooms had this in a poster. They showed a set of barbells, and it said Ezu gibor akovesh es Yisro. Who's the really strong one? The person who can subdue his desires. It's not always in the sexual nature. We all have desires. It could be someone who's got a real desire to be have a violent personality, and someone who's got an anger management problem. That's your thing. So if I could overcome that desire, if I could I wanted to lash out at that person. I wanted to let them have it. And I could say, no, I'm gonna refrain. I'm gonna buckle that down. I'm gonna bottle that up. That's a gibor. If we really want to be someone who's strong, it's a kovish as Yisro, someone who's able to subdue our inclinations, our desires, our temptations. But the best way to do all this is to try to steer ourselves clear. Don't put ourselves in a compromising and tempting a scenario in the first place. So again, just to review, we started with that news story out of Chattanooga and about that pastor of the mega church who threw his life, his marriage, everything, another marriage. We should never make the mistake of thinking, yeah, that's only for the mega church guy. Can never happen to me. Absolute mistake. The pasuk in our parsha this week says, the way the Meshech Chachma learns that Kohanim in particular were prone to this challenge because of the fact that, number one, they were in positions, they were in scenarios where they had to have working relationships with women who were not their wives and family members. They could start to develop a liking for them. And many of them were married. And if they were married, then they knew that they can't just break up the marriage with a divorce and hope to get together because they can't marry a grusha. The only way they could do that is if the husband dies, she has to be an almana. How's that going to happen? Kill the husband. That can very easily lead to murder. So even the Kohen. So that's what it's saying. We're not immune to this. All of us are subject as human beings. We're hardwired to be the victims and to fall prey to temptation and to desire. We're fooling ourselves if we think we're above the fray. So we've got to recognize this inherent weakness that each and every one of us have for any number of different temptations. We have to be aware of it. That's number one. And once we're aware of it, now we have to be smart and we have to think, what can I do to minimize the challenge? What can I do to minimize the temptation? And the best way to minimize the temptation, we learn from Yosef, who becomes known as Yosef HaTzadik. The best way to minimize that temptation is to try to avoid it. Don't get the train started. It's a lot harder to stop a moving train than it is to stop it from running in the first place. Okay, with that, we're going to conclude today. I hope some of these insights were helpful. I hope some of these could be useful. Maybe these are some sources that we weren't aware of before.